The tension inside Judge Judy's courtroom wasn't just thick, it was surgical. You could slice it and watch the pieces fall apart like a courtroom drama penned by fate itself. At the center of this televised theater sat Jasmine Crockett, a figure of stillness in a hurricane. The congresswoman didn't fidget, didn't blink, didn't bother adjusting the hem of her suit. She simply sat there like she'd been summoned by destiny, not subpoenas. Eyes forward, posture, steel heart unshaken. On the other side, the legend, Judith Sheindlin, Judge Judy, the name that once sent shivers down petty criminals' spines and daytime television audiences into rapturous glee. She didn't just lean over her bench, she loomed. Her gaze wasn't just sharp, it was tactical, like a sniper, searching for weakness. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, letting the title drip with as much disdain as she could muster. "I've heard about your grandstanding in Congress, and frankly, I think someone needs to teach you a lesson about respect for authority." The air left the courtroom. Let's be clear, this was no ordinary docket dispute. This wasn't two neighbors bickering over a broken fence. This was something else entirely. This was spectacle. This was confrontation. This was generational, political, judicial, cultural. Judge Judy had ruled her courtroom and her television kingdom with an iron tongue for over 2 decades. She'd made millions turning legal decorum into primetime thunder. She had the ratings. She had the reputation. She had the robes. But she'd never met anyone like Jasmine Crockett. And what was about to unfold would not only go viral, it would go into the history books. Jasmine Crockett inhaled, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough. Then she spoke. "Your Honor," she began. Her voice was controlled, polished. But there was iron behind it. Enough steel to reinforce the Capitol dome. "I would suggest you check your facts before you presume to lecture me." Gasp. From the audience, from the crew, from the very walls. This wasn't defiance. It wasn't rebellion. It was precision. Nobody talks back to Judge Judy. Not celebrities. Not litigants. Not even high-priced lawyers trying to look good for the camera. But Jasmine wasn't here to look good. She was here to hold the line. Judge Judy arched one eyebrow, the famous brow that had sentenced more egos to oblivion than any court of appeals. "Oh, really?" she said, voice like ice cracking. "Yes," Crockett replied. Not a flinch, not a smile, just facts waiting to be deployed. "Now let's pull back. To understand the magnitude of what was happening, you have to understand who these two women were. Judge Judy Sheindlin, a titan of television law. From Brooklyn roots, to family court judge, to global icon, she'd earned every cent of her $47 million salary, making her the highest paid television personality in the United States. She wasn't just a judge. She was a brand, a regime, a standard-bearer for a certain kind of law and order America that believed respect was earned by titles, by age, by experience. And now on her stage stood someone who embodied everything that regime feared. Jasmine Crockett. At 42, she wasn't just a politician. She was a former civil rights attorney, a firebrand with a resume that read like a gauntlet. She didn't get into Congress through dynasties or donors. She fought her way in. From courtroom trenches, from racial barriers, from systemic ceilings. She didn't believe in bowing. She believed in truth. And now she was face to face with a woman who'd spent 25 years punishing anything that looked like a challenge to her authority. This wasn't a debate. This was a reckoning. Judge Judy leaned in. "I've practiced law longer than you've been alive," she said, her voice rising. "And I've seen 100 young lawyers come through here thinking they're smarter than everyone else. They're usually wrong." That was her first mistake. Because what Judy didn't know was that Jasmine had already heard this speech. She'd heard it in courtrooms where she'd been underestimated. She'd heard it from old-school colleagues who couldn't believe a black woman from Houston knew more constitutional law than they did. She'd heard it her whole life. And every time she'd dismantled it with facts. So she stayed quiet, just long enough for the room to remember who they were dealing with. Then she leaned forward. "Your Honor," she said, her voice now like flint against flint. "You say you've seen lawyers like me, But what I see is a judge who hasn't met anyone like me. Pause. You don't know my record. You don't know my oath. And you don't know what the Constitution actually empowers me to do. But by the end of this hearing, you will. The silence wasn't just thick, it was seismic. Somewhere in the back, a producer whispered, "Are we rolling?" Because history was. Judge Judy had entered this courtroom ready to scold. But she was about to get a lesson in constitutional power. And Jasmine Crockett was just getting started. Judge Judy Schindlin didn't build her empire on compromise. She didn't smile sweetly, didn't placate nonsense, and definitely didn't suffer fools. Her television courtroom wasn't about nuance. It was about clarity. She ruled with a combination of biting sarcasm, razor logic, and absolute authority. Millions watched her each day not because they sought justice, but because they craved judgment. So when she fixed her glare on Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't for show. It was muscle memory. It was instinct. "Let me explain something to you, Congresswoman," she snapped papers, shuffling theatrically beneath her hand. "I've seen your antics. Yelling. Accusing. Talking over people. That may fly in political theater, but not here." The audience leaned in. Everyone braced for Jasmine to flinch, to apologize, to soften. Instead, Crockett shifted her weight forward, ever so slightly. Her elbows planted. Her chin rose. "I think you misunderstand what it is." "I do, Your Honor," she said, voice even. "I don't talk over people. I talk through the noise. There's a difference. A beat. And as for political theater, I deal in facts. That might not be entertaining, but it is effective." Judy narrowed her eyes. There it was again. No fear, no retreat, just the cold certainty of someone who had come ready. "Congresswoman," she said slowly, each syllable deliberate, "this isn't Capitol Hill. This is my courtroom. And in here I have the final word." Crockett raised an eyebrow. Respectfully, she replied, "You may want to remember that this courtroom is also a television set. One where your authority ends the moment I stop playing along." Gasps again. This wasn't rebellion. This was defiance by design. And for the first time, Judy blinked. Because Crockett wasn't wrong. Judge Judy's entire domain was a set. A production. She wasn't an active judge anymore. She was an arbitrator for entertainment. And now she was face to face with a sitting member of Congress who had sworn an oath not to ratings but to the Constitution. Crockett leaned back. But not to retreat. To prepare. "You see, Your Honor," she said, "what I do isn't about optics. It's about oversight. And the Constitution doesn't ask me to be quiet. It commands me to speak up." She pulled a small folder from her bag. Tidy. Indexed. Prepared. Like a good attorney. Like a good legislator. The audience stilled. Judge Judy folded her hands. "What is that?" she asked. "Facts," Crockett said. "And receipts." Judy bristled. Crockett opened the folder. "Let's talk about what respect for authority means in a constitutional republic," she began. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform. She taught. Congress has 3 jobs: to legislate, to fund, and to oversee. Oversight isn't optional, it's mandatory. That includes questioning Supreme Court justices. That includes interrogating ethical failures. That includes being loud when silence would be complicity. She paused. "You call it grandstanding. I call it governance." Judy tried to interject, but Crockett didn't stop. "And as for my tone," she continued, "I've sat through hearings where women's bodies were debated without women at the table. I've asked questions about judges accepting secret gifts and got nothing but smirks in return. I've pressed for transparency while being labeled hostile." She snapped the folder shut. "If that tone makes people uncomfortable, good. That means it's working." Silence. Total. Undeniable. Judy looked at her papers, then back at Crockett. "You may have your facts," she said, "but you still lack one thing: respect." Crockett's eyes didn't waver. "I respect the Constitution," she said. "I respect my oath." She stood up. "And I respect the people who elected me more than I respect any television script demanding I sit down and smile." The audience didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just stared. Because they knew Judy's courtroom had just become Crockett's classroom. It wasn't over. Judge Judy wasn't done. She reached deep not just into her notes but into that reservoir of authority she had built across decades of domination. "I've presided over more than 10,000 cases," she barked. "I've seen every excuse, every ploy, every angle. I don't need a lesson from someone who's only been in Congress for a few years." But Crockett didn't blink. Because Judy had just made her second fatal error. She underestimated Crockett's preparation. "Your Honor," she said, voice cool as polished granite. "If we're going to compare resume, let's do it fairly." She pulled out another folder, this one thicker. The kind of folder that says, "I came ready for war." "This," she said, lifting the contents, "is a compiled record of your judicial decisions from your time in family court. Before television. Before makeup. Before camera angles." Judy's lips tightened. The audience turned into an oxygenless chamber. Crockett began reading. "One of your most cited rulings denied a mother the right to child support, suggesting she should have made better choices. That ruling was overturned by an appellate court in 1990. The court's exact language, a failure to apply the proper legal standard." Boom. Another case, Crockett continued, involved denying custody to a father based solely on income level. That decision, too, was reversed. The appellate court noted, "Personal bias appears to have overridden statutory interpretation." Boom again. Judy stood frozen, still seated, but legally disarmed. "This isn't personal," Crockett said carefully, folding the documents back in place. "This is professional." She looked directly at the judge. "You questioned my credentials. I'm demonstrating yours." It was surgical. It was ruthless. It was textbook courtroom reversal. And it was just getting started. "Now," Crockett said, her voice low and deliberate, "let's discuss the difference between law and television." Her tone had shifted. No longer just calm, it was controlled. Like a closing argument in a high-stakes trial. "You've built a career making quick judgments," she said, stepping forward slowly, deliberately, condensing people's lives into 5-minute verdicts and catchphrases. "But this isn't a soundbite. This is the Constitution. This is reality." The audience was silent. No coughs, no phones. Just breathless attention. "You said you've seen 1,000 cases, maybe more. But how many of those decisions have been peer-reviewed? Reversed? How many were entertainment, rather than justice?" Judy looked like she wanted to speak, but Crockett held up a hand. "Respectfully, Your Honor, let me finish. Because unlike your show, this isn't scripted. This is earned." She took another paper from her folder. A printed statement from the American Bar Association. "In 1992, you were formally cited for applying subjective bias over statutory guidance." That's a direct quote. That citation was never retracted. Gasps. Again. Not from drama. From documentation. "You want to question my professionalism. My decorum. I practiced civil rights law in federal court. I defended innocent people against systemic failure. I didn't do it with applause. I did it with case law and grit." She took another step. "You say I'm loud, maybe I am. But silence is what allowed the powerful to go unchecked. Silence is what they counted on." Judge Judy sat back. Not defeated. Not yet. But clearly shaken. And Crockett wasn't done. "You say I don't understand respect. But here's what I understand better than most respect. Doesn't mean submission. It doesn't mean reverence for titles. It means accountability." Now Crockett turned to the audience. "To all of you watching. Young lawyers. Young women. Especially women of color. Understand this, you don't have to lower your voice to raise your credibility. Enter you. Enter. You men." The audience was still, captivated. "Judge Judy, you called me a grandstander. But this isn't about ego. This is about duty. I'm not here for applause. I'm here because our system depends on people who won't be quiet when something smells wrong." Crockett folded her papers. "Set them down." and sat. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She waited. Because real power doesn't shout. It resonates. The courtroom wasn't quiet anymore. It was holding its breath. Judge Judy's lips pressed into a thin line. She reached for her gavel but didn't bring it down. Because even she knew. She was no longer in control. Jasmine Crockett had done more than hold her ground. She had redrawn the lines of authority. And now, Judy had a choice. Double down or pivot. She chose the former. "Congresswoman," she said. Voice dipped in condescension. "This isn't a law school lecture. You don't get to grandstand here. I ask the questions." Crockett stood again. Slowly. Not in protest, but in precision. "Then ask," she said. 4 letters. A challenge. A trap. Judge Judy didn't hesitate. "Why do you think raising your voice, pointing fingers and talking down to others is the way to earn respect?" Crockett tilted her head. That question was exactly the mistake she'd been waiting for. "Let me clarify something," she said. "I don't raise my voice to earn respect. I raise it to cut through obstruction." She turned to the gallery. When decorum is used to silence dissent, it's no longer civility, it's suppression. Then eyes back on the bench. "And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Because the comfort of power is often the cloak of injustice." Judge Judy's fingers twitched. She looked down at her notes. But Crockett wasn't finished. "You ask why I speak firmly, why I interrogate unflinchingly. Because while you were building a television brand, I was defending clients facing decades in prison." She pulled out a document. "Here," she said, holding it high, "is a case I argued in federal court. United States versus Daniels. My client, a black man, wrongfully accused, facing 25 years. The evidence was circumstantial. The prosecutor overreached. I shredded their case." She laid the paper down. He walked free. Gasps rippled. Crockett continued. "And when I took the oath of office as a congresswoman, I brought that same fire. Because in those hearings when I challenge Supreme Court justices, I'm not doing it for show. I'm doing it so no one like Daniels is ever wrongfully sentenced again." Her voice did not rise. It sharpened. "Power does not intimidate me. It motivates me." Judge Judy tapped her pen. Twice. Then 3 times. As if looking for an escape hatch. There was none. Because Crockett had flipped the courtroom. No longer defendant. Now prosecutor. "You accuse me of grandstanding," she said, eyes locked. "But let's be honest, Judge. You made millions turning other people's pain into punchlines." The room froze. "You monetized humiliation. You choreographed judgment." Then calmly, "You were never the law. You were the script." A pause. "You wanted television justice. I live constitutional justice." Silence. Unrelenting. Total. Judge Judy finally spoke. Her voice quiet. "Even. We're done here." Crockett gathered her folders. Turned. Paused at the door. Then, "For the record," she said, not looking back, "I didn't come here to win. I came here to witness the fall of old authority." And with that, she walked out, leaving behind a courtroom that would never be the same. What came next wasn't silence. It was transformation. The moment Jasmine Crockett exited that courtroom, she didn't just leave behind a stunned audience. She left behind a narrative rewritten. Outside, the courthouse steps swarmed with cameras, microphones, and anticipation. Reporters shouted, "Congresswoman Crockett, will you speak?" She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She descended the steps like a verdict being delivered. A young black girl, no older than 12, squeezed past the crowd holding a hand-drawn sign. It read, "Loud is powerful." Crockett stopped. Kneeled. "Is this yours?" she asked. The girl nodded, eyes wide. "Then don't let anyone take your volume away," Crockett said. And stood. The flashbulbs exploded. The clips would circulate globally within hours. But it wasn't just viral. It was visceral. Inside the courthouse, Judge Judy sat alone. Not in shame, in reckoning. She looked around her, set the bench, the lights, the silence. and saw not a courtroom, but a relic. The show wasn't over. It had ended. Crockett didn't need closing statements. Her facts had done the speaking. Her logic had landed the blows. What she offered wasn't just defiance. It was a blueprint. And somewhere in offices, classrooms, and boardrooms across the country, people were watching, taking notes, learning. Because this wasn't about Judge Judy anymore. This was about what comes after. And it had Jasmine Crockett's name written all over it. It didn't take long for the backlash to begin. Not from the streets, but from the studios. Cable news lit up. Commentators from polished panels leaned forward armed with faux outrage and scripted incredulity. One network anchor declared, "Crockett disrespected a legal legend on national television. This wasn't bravery, it was theater." Another, more venomous, spat. "She weaponized identity. She bullied an elder." That wasn't justice, it was arrogance. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Because she knew. When the truth makes power tremble, the first response is always deflection. What they saw as arrogance was armor. What they called disrespect was accountability. Still, the noise grew louder. Clips circulated. Pundits analyzed every eyebrow raise, every pause, every folder. They tried to decode strategy, searching for weakness. But there was none. Because Crockett hadn't performed. She had prosecuted. And America had been the jury. Inside the Capitol, the rumblings were different. Colleagues who once whispered doubts now walked up to her with purpose. Jasmine once said, "You didn't just speak truth to power. You unmasked the costume it hides behind." In private emails, staffers from conservative offices wrote things like, "I don't agree with your politics, but what you did in that courtroom, that was undeniable." And in classrooms across the country, law professors paused their syllabi to show the clip. This, they said, was advocacy. This was precedent. The moment when cross-examination leapt out of textbooks and into real time. Jasmine Crockett didn't just survive Judge Judy. She redefined the genre. Television producers begged for interviews. They offered exclusive segments, primetime features, even branded documentaries. She declined most. Not out of pride, out of priority. Because while cameras were catching up to her courage, she had already moved on. To the next hearing. To the next question no one dared ask. To the next institution, long overdue for interrogation. She wasn't a moment. She was momentum. And no one, not even the queen of courtroom television, could stop that. But while the world debated tone and tactics, one person remained notably silent. Judge Judy. She hadn't issued a statement. No press release. No follow-up segment. Nothing. Her silence wasn't avoidance. It was calculation. And then, she emerged. In a controlled interview on a legacy network. Air immaculate. Gavel figurine behind her on a shelf. She leaned forward and said, "I've faced mafia dons and pathological liars. I've held my own against manipulative plaintiffs and slick-talking lawyers. But that young woman, she caught me off guard." The host nodded, stunned. "You're saying she bested you?" Judy's jaw flexed. "I'm saying she replied. She didn't blink. And that's rare." The admission broke headlines. But Judy didn't stop there. She came with facts. She came with force. And while I may not agree with her delivery, her command of the Constitution was undeniable. It wasn't an apology. But it was recognition. And that was more than Crockett needed. Because validation was never the goal. Impact was. In that same week, congressional hearings aired again. Crockett sat on the Oversight Committee, this time questioning a tech billionaire accused of surveillance breaches. Her tone, identical. Her precision, sharper than ever. No apologies. No rebrands. Just governance, loud, lucid, and lethal. A clip of that hearing went viral again. Different stage. Same fire. And in a quiet moment backstage, a fellow congresswoman whispered, "Jasmine, you're not just rewriting courtroom drama. You're rewriting political posture." Crockett smiled. Because she knew this wasn't a season. It was a standard. and it was here to stay. What began as a television moment had now evolved into a legislative ripple. In Capitol, corridors once too cold for confrontation warmth now followed Crockett's footsteps. Not adoration. Respect. Not for volume, but for vision. The Judiciary Committee, once reluctant, now requested her input on draft reforms. Newsroom analysts, desperate to frame her rise, struggled for language. Some called it a movement. Others feared it was a takeover. But what none could deny was that Crockett had redrawn the coordinates of power. Not with scandal, not with compromise, but with confrontation tethered to Constitution. At Howard Law, students debated her tactics. Is she too sharp? One asked. No, another replied. She's the necessary blade in a system dulled by politeness. Meanwhile, legacy institutions, ones that once ignored her, now scrambled to co-sign her. Time magazine's cover read, "The Prosecutor of Power, Jasmine Crockett, and the New Rules of Accountability." Inside, a full feature. No stylists. No glamour shots. Just quotes. Raw. Unfiltered. One line stood out. "They expect women like me to wait my turn. I don't believe in lines. I believe in leverage." Elsewhere, a state Supreme Court cited her congressional interrogation techniques as an example of legislative due diligence. This wasn't influence. This was jurisprudence. And at the center of it, Crockett didn't waver. Didn't brand. Didn't pause. She was already onto the next breach. The next breach of ethics. The next smirking witness. The next system cloaked in tradition but rotted with neglect. For every voice that said she went too far, there were 10 that said she went exactly where justice feared to tread. And in private, she remained unchanged. Books, folders, long nights of study. Because being sharp wasn't enough. You had to stay sharp. Every step she took was deliberate. Every hearing. A battlefield. Every silence. A setup. Every answer. A strike. She wasn't just walking into rooms anymore. She was redefining their shape. The final chapter wasn't written in a courtroom. It wasn't staged for television. It unfolded under oath. During a high-stakes oversight hearing, the witness, a federal judge under ethics investigation. Ties to billionaire donors, undisclosed vacations, private jets, and a trail of rulings that favored the connected. The chamber was tense. Every camera in the country was locked in, and Jasmine Crockett was holding the gavel, not metaphorically. Literally, she had been appointed temporary chair, and with a single knock, she summoned the hearing to order. The judge shifted, uncomfortable, unprepared, because he didn't realize this wasn't about his past. It was about her precedent. Crockett began with precision. "Let's establish foundation," she said. Her tone wasn't loud. It was lethal. "You received gifts from individuals with cases before your court." The judge hesitated. "I can't recall the specifics." She raised a document. "Then allow me to assist." She read line by line. Citations. Flight logs. Financial disclosures. Each detail sharpened the noose. By the 4th page, he was unraveling. "I believe those were personal friends," he muttered. Crockett leaned in. "Your Honor, is it your position that justice should depend on friendship?" He blinked. Stammered. She didn't let go. "You signed opinions affecting millions while boarding private yachts owned by the interested parties. Do you call that impartial?" The room froze. No one breathed. And the judge went silent. Crockett closed her folder, looked around the room, and said, "This is what happens when oversight isn't loud, when power goes unchecked, when the people are told to trust shadows." She lifted the gavel. "One thing I learned facing Judge Judy. A pause. The louder voice isn't always the wrong one. Sometimes it's the last defense we have." Then, bang. Hearing adjourned. No applause. Just history. Written not with grace, but with grit. Jasmine Crockett didn't just make noise. She made law. And justice, finally, sounded like her.